The Drumming News Network is the fastest growing daily news source for drummers. Feed your passion. Visit daily for all the drumming news. DrummingNewsNetwork.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Rogne from Drumming News Network, and with me I have Rob Wallis, who formed DCI in 1982 and later on as a co-founder of Hudson Music. Welcome. And of course, Rob Cook, author, Chicago Drum Show, so many amazing books. Both these guys are such an education with everything to do from musical learning to the history of drums. So, guys, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So in May, it was announced by Hudson Music that you are now offering digital versions of Mr. Cook's books. Can you talk about how that process came about?
Sure. I guess I'll go first. I've been a fan of Rob's work and all his books, and I personally love vintage drums, and just felt that our platform might help spread the word to other people that might not have access to his books. Because it's online, it's obviously worldwide, so access is really easy for people if you're in Japan or England or wherever, and maybe don't have access to picking up a physical copy of the book. And that's really the idea behind the whole Hudson website, is just to get as much content there for drummers and let people pick what they want, and hopefully make it available and easily accessible. So that's about how it happened. And just being a fan of Rob's books, we've done a few things in the past with his the Vintage Drum Show, which hopefully this year I hope to attend. And it just that we put it together, and that's the way it happened. It was pretty quick.
Well, a number of these books are out of publication, and I know you're offering them in a digital interface. Will that interface be available on a cell phone as well in an app format?
Yes.
Or okay,
it's available for any device, and now we even have a web-based browser, so you don't need to download any kind of app or anything to be able to see the book.
Okay.
Yeah, which is great.
And it interfaces with every computer, every handheld device, and everything's good.
Yep.
Quickly before we talk to Rob, could you talk a little bit about the process of creating a digital format of the book? Because essentially you have to kind of rewrite it all for publication digitally, correct?
You want me to answer that one?
Please, yes.
Not really. I mean, we use the basic text of the book. The book reader acts like a book. You flip pages and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob's books don't have them, but some of the books that have any kind of external media like video or audio, there's just a little button that you tap, and the screen opens up and the video plays, and then you minimize it. You keep going, through the book. Or if there's audio, you just tap it and it'll play the audio, so you can work on the exercise and hear the audio at the same time. So it's a really elegant, and it's a great tool. I feel the digital books, actually, when there is media, I feel it's better than a physical book, because you don't have to worry about finding an audio file or going to a website or downloading something. It's just the digital book. It's right there in front of you. And for Rob's books, they're all the text is there. They're really identical to the physical book. We use the same files as what goes to the printer, actually.
Oh, okay. I guess that was my question too, because I know with the digital format books, depending on the device, they have to modify digitally versus taking a PDF and scaling it. So I was wondering if that was an in-depth process, but since you can actually use his files, that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. And sometimes we just have to manipulate them to fit the page properly, but it's we have guys that do that and do really great work on that. So the stuff looks really good when you're seeing it on your screen.
Fantastic. So Rob, Mr. Cook, if you could please talk a little bit about two Robs, I know what we're going to do. Can you talk a little bit about how they approached you and your thought process about going digital with your books?
Sure. I was really glad to hear from Rob, because cut me off if this gets too long-winded, but most of my publications are, histories of drum companies and biographies of drummers, and there are several books in my catalog that were done by other people. Like for a while, I was doing Traps the Drum Wonder, which was an Oxford book originally. It went out of print, and Oxford couldn't see their way to reprinting it. And I worked out a deal with Mel Torme, the author, on a limited run. I just paid the royalty on, I don't know, 1,000 copies or whatever, and we printed it. But the larger point I'm trying to get to is this is a very niche market business. I once exhibited at a ABA convention, largest group of booksellers and publishers and so on in the world, and I didn't sell a book there. They had an area for small press, and you could get a table for a couple $100, and you couldn't put out more than 8 titles or something. But it was perfect for somebody like me. But when you look at 100,000 book buyers, how many of them are interested in drum history? First, if they don't have a store that specializes in it, they're certainly not going to have a clientele that is beating down the door for it. So most of my books have been a print run of anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000, and 5,000 is only going to be for a book like the Ludwig book or the Gretsch or one of the bigger ones. And the way the numbers kind of shake out, if somebody comes to me with a manuscript and they want to get it printed, and I have to kind of explain, well, yeah, I could probably sell 50 of those over the next 5 years, but anything that you print for the most part that's under 1,000 copies, you've got a real challenge. Try to keep your head above water. There are other ways of going, like print on demand, but and there you can print as little as 10 copies, but it costs a lot more. The quality isn't the same as the regular offset printing and so on. So the dilemma for somebody like me with a very niche market, I can sell more of my books at drum shows like the Chicago Drum Show and so on than trying to go to general bookstores or anything like that. Hal Leonard distributed a lot of my hard copy books for a number of years. And the challenge I ran into there was they feed a lot of large retailers that are used to big discounts and used to selling at a discount. And I discovered at one point that any ISBN and cover image of a coming Rebeats book that was turned over to Hal Leonard so it would be in their catalog for the next season immediately fed some of their resellers. And sometimes my books were being sold at discount by those resellers before I even had the books in my hand. And that didn't work for me. So my MO became to only sell the books myself at retail at my drum show for the first 6 months until I kind of made some of my nut back. And then once I kind of filled the pipeline as best I could, then ship it to Hal Leonard for a little bit wider market penetration. And so that's why it was really great to hear from Rob, because it was a whole new market segment that I wasn't reaching. And I couldn't afford to do that on my own, obviously, because these books are not like tires or groceries that everybody needs. And if you spend the kind of money that the food producers and the tire companies spend on advertising, sure, I'd sell a lot more, but it would be eaten up in that advertising. So I was very thankful for Rob to open a whole new avenue of distribution and reach more people in ways that I couldn't on my own. So it worked out very nicely.
So, but a lot of your books are out of print or close to being out of print. So now Hudson is about the only place you can go now to read these books.
Well, I do have an arrangement with Ingram for print on demand, and I don't even have to stock them. I mean,
Okay.
it's kind of the same formatting. I send Ingram a PDF that's formatted to their specifications, and after it's cleared their checklist and approved and everything, and goes into their system, boom, it's available pretty much worldwide. They have print facilities in the UK and the European continent and Australia. So again, I'm reaching more parts of the world. Sending a Gretsch book at £4 to Europe. I mean, the book is $40 and it's
Yeah.
like $67 to mail it, and that just didn't make sense. But the print on demand um, has helped. And keeps books in print that wouldn't otherwise be worth redoing. One was Best Seat in the House by Jerry Shirley, the drummer with Humble Pie,
Hmm.
and that did pretty well for a while. Then it tapered off, and after what was it, 5 years, 6 years, it, by the time we finally ran out of hard copy altogether, it just wouldn't. It was selling so few copies that I just couldn't justify printing 1,000 of them. So it worked perfectly into that scenario with Ingram, and it kind of took off. It took a little splurge when it first came out on
Hmm.
Ingram's POD plan. I think in the 6 or 8 months it's been out, I've sold maybe a couple hundred in the US and a couple hundred in Europe and a handful in Australia. So that's working out. Nobody's getting rich, but it's important for myself and the author, obviously, to keep it available. There was a lot of work putting it together, so
Hmm.
it's nice that it's still out there.
Well, Rob, how long ago did Hudson get into providing digital book formats?
We've been doing it for a while, several years.
Hmm.
We've been through a few different iterations of players and so forth. Fortunately or unfortunately, when COVID hit, the demand went way up because people were all over the world, were, kind of trapped in their houses. Gigs were canceled, tours were canceled, whatever. And so people were looking for things to do at home, and nothing easier than hitting a button, putting in your credit card and getting a book, instantly,
Hmm.
with no mailing, no, kind of no fuss, no muss. So, the catalog grew and the demand grew, quite a bit over the past 3 years. But
Okay.
we've been at it. We were early on, in terms of digital books, very early on. But as we've kind of gotten, the world has turned more and more digital. Our physical sales, like Rob's saying, have gone down, and our digital sales have gone up. So it's
Hmm.
been a real, thank goodness, or, Hudson would be probably on some very thin ice if we didn't have, kind of the digital, backbone that we have. And, to me, like I said, a little earlier, it's a great format, especially when there's media, because it really, you don't have to have a DVD player or a CD player or go online. It's just right. It's instant touch. So it's right there.
I'm
And
intrigued
I,
by that, the media. So, like with instructional books, and when there's a transcription of something, you can just hear how it's played.
Ye-
Yeah.
if we set the book up that way, and we have a new player now for transcriptions where, yeah, it's at the bottom of the screen, and it kind of lights up, and even there's a counter on the side of the bar that shows you where the downbeats are in case you get
Wow,
lost.
nice.
And there's a click if you want it. So yeah, that it's all evolving, like
Yeah.
everything in the media world, right? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's been uh, nicely accepted, and I think we were ahead of the curve, and I'm really glad. for me, like I said, I just want to try to make as much content from all over the world available to people all over the world. So, every day we're getting, authors from Italy and India and, Japan. It's pretty incredible. Partly because, we're one of the last men standing. But I have a hard time saying no to people. So it's coupling that, it's the catalog has grown, quickly, and I have a great group of guys that put the books together and oversee all the digital work that we do.
Were you able to update some of the original stuff, like the old DCI VHS videos? Have those been?
Yeah, some. Yes, we've done some licensing back. Alfred owns that old catalog that my partner and I did back starting in the 80s. And we actually have an announcement coming out probably in the spring on a new project involving some of the old titles, but which is pretty cool. But yeah, we also, besides books, we have a whole digital video player, and all of our videos and a bunch of the old ones are available,
Nice.
as digital downloads.
Nice.
Just out of interest, some of the old publications of drum magazines, as we're seeing a good amount of the drum magazines going away, is there an opportunity for you to be able to offer those?
It's a great, it's a great idea. I'm going to have to write that one down.
I'll take 10%.
I tell you, I always felt, years ago, and I used to deal with all of the major drum magazines around the world. I'd see the guys once a year at NAMM, or if I was over at the Frankfurt Music Fair. I always felt that the magazines, and this was even before kind of the decline of print, newspapers and magazines in general. I used to just feel if there was some way of setting up a clearinghouse of articles, because if there's a magazine in the United States that puts out a story on, Steve Gadd, and there's a magazine in Japan that puts one out, and there's a magazine in Italy that puts one out, if they're all in their native languages, I don't see how they compete. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right.
People in Italy buy the Italian version and people in Japan buy the Japanese version. And I just felt that every month these magazines would, kill themselves to get content, month after month, when if there was some kind of sharing happening, I think it would have saved a lot of those businesses, because a lot of them, unfortunately, are, like you're saying, Paul, they're gone, So, and it's a shame, because I think some of the magazines had some really creative, output and exposed drummers that maybe were under the radar, that weren't the top same 20, drummers that everybody wanted to know about. But, they would drill down a little deeper and talk
Mm-hmm.
about, studio players that you didn't know, or, touring drummers that were in, not the biggest bands, but sort of the B and C level, acts that are, were great players. And I think that's missed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame that there's been such a drop off in the number of magazines around the world. It's not just a US kind of phenomenon.
Right. Yeah, I think a drum magazine, as well as a tactile book, is very important, but also the digital format too, because like you said, it kind of crosses the bridge to if you're if you're traveling or anything, or instant
Totally.
gratification. So
Yeah.
I think both formats are still very critical. But I swear, I love drum magazines. Just historically having them, and if there was a way to search through digitally, to search through to say look at my favorite drummer and pull up every article, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great idea to have an archive of all these articles, especially, in various languages, and, if they could all be shared language, an article that was done, on, Max Roach in Italy, if we could get that in English and let American, drummers read it, stuff like that, that would be great.
We're trying on Drumming News Network here on Sundays throughout December. Rhythm and Drum magazine over in Japan. One of the articles, since that magazine's gone out of print, unfortunately, we're taking a special on John Bonham and we transferred it to English. And we're trying to see how well that'll work and see if we can talk to them more about sharing some more of their old articles that they had, because it was a good. It's cool to have a viewpoint on a drummer that is so worldly loved, from another country's point of view. It's just kind of neat.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, if there's anything we can do to be a part of that, I would love to just expose more people to, whatever it is you're working on. And that was a great magazine. I used to get the downside was every month I'd end up with, a stack of drum magazines every month, from all over the world, because we were
Right.
advertising, and they wanted me to see, what they were doing. So it was great. And that was a great magazine, very high quality, paper they used, great photography. It was just sad to see that one go.
Well, one more question. Talking about DCI, is it fair to say that DCI was the innovator of video drum education?
Pretty much, yeah.
So
We started in 1980, 81.
okay. So back then, video production was ridiculously expensive.
Mhm.
So, and now it's still expensive, but I mean, compared to then, a shoot like that could cost $40,000 maybe for a.
Oh, easily. The equipment alone, we used to rent these cameras that were, $75,000 cameras. They would rent for, roughly $1,000 a day. And then you'd rent the lens.
Yeah.
That was another $60,000 or $70,000 piece of equipment for another 1,000. So I mean, each camera was in New York, at least,
Right.
which I'm sure is on the high side. But we were spending just on camera per day, not including the operator. Then you pay the cameraman,
Mhm.
a daily fee for 10 hours. Yeah, so our expenses really in the beginning, this was in the infancy of video. We would tape lights to the ceiling. I mean, my partner and I had no idea what we were doing. We didn't come from a technical background. We were both drummers, and I had heard from a friend that said, you know what, there's this thing called the VCR coming. Everyone's going to have one in their living room one day, and it's going to play, these tapes, and you'll be able to record on them and hook them up to your TV in your living room and watch, videos that you make and other people, and they'll sell movies probably. So I jumped on it, really early on, and we just sort of learned the hard way,
Mhm.
getting cameras. We knew nothing about lenses and cameras and so forth. And then I realized, as we started progressing and seeing that there was an interest, we kept raising the bar in terms of the quality of the work we were doing, hiring, better and better people and better equipment. And then there was a lighting director, and then it got crazy. Then we needed a day for lighting. So
Right.
we'd have to have the studio for an extra day just to do the lighting. Then we had such a big crew. Then we needed catering, and then we used to have somebody, whose job was just to make sure there was food for everybody.
Right.
So it got crazy. And in hindsight, it was probably a little too crazy, but we always tried to deliver the highest quality that we could afford. And sometimes, we didn't make our investment back. During the real sort of heyday in the 80s and early 90s of video.
Mhm.
um, we spent a lot, but we knew it would come back. Towards the end, we got burned a few times because we spent more than we should have, and we didn't ever recoup that money, because
Right.
the video was starting to trail off at that point. And then YouTube came, and then everything hit the fan at that point, so to speak. But yeah, we were, to come back to your question, we were the first company to do educational drum videos for sure in the world.
I mean, how did you get some of those drummers on board? Like, for instance, Neil Peart. Sorry, I always say Peart. Sorry, Neil Peart. You did a number of videos with him, and as far as I understand, he's kind of a private person. I'm sure after you did the first one, he wanted to come back to you, but was a work in progress the first one you did?
Yeah, work in progress. That was the first educational one. With Neil, we wanted to work with him for years, and Neil was a very private person. He rarely even spoke on the phone. We used to send, we had his address. We would send him a letter. We'd say, "Hey Neil, what do you think? We want to do an instructional video with you." And he'd write back. A month later, we'd get a letter back. "Yeah, I want to do it too, but I'm really busy with the band, or we're starting writing now, or we're recording now, or we're touring." It was a pretty much a all year round, time consuming to be in Rush for Neil. They'd have some down vacation time, but it was always something going on. And so that went on for years. We would write every 6 months. He would write back. We would write to him, went back and forth. And finally one day we get a letter back from him. He said, "Okay, you wore me down. I'm going to be on the East Coast in the winter." This was 6 months. His schedule was planned out way in advance. He said, "I know can carve out a little bit of time, and let's start planning this thing." And but backing up before that, with the first time we actually worked with Neil was on one of the tribute to Buddy Rich, the scholarship concerts that Kathy Rich put on. That was the one in New York that Neil sort of ventured out of Rush. It was his first sort of outside project, so to speak. And we filmed that. So we got to meet Neil at that point, and he saw the way we worked, and that we were, we didn't try to take advantage of him or anything. We treated him just like everyone else, even though the line for that show was 3 blocks down the street in New York, because people would never see Neil. It was crazy that the fire department was screaming at me to let people in the building, or they were going to shut the show down, because they were concerned about traffic jams in Midtown Manhattan. But aside from that, so we got to work with Neil then, and then after that he called and asked if we would be interested in filming a record he was producing called a Burning for Buddy. And I think it had 24 drummers or something, that over the course of 2 weeks, every day there were 2 guys coming in, and they would record a tune with Buddy's big band in New York. And it was a who's who of everyone you could think of at that point. So, and he wanted it very low key. He didn't want a big crew in there. He wanted my partner and myself to film, which we'd never done before. So we went out and bought some small cameras and did the best we could with 2 cameras, trying to cover, all these drummers coming in, plus what was happening out in the lobby, which was, an incredible hang, and getting the big band and everything. But it was a lot of work. We were working like 15 hours a day, every day for 2 weeks, but it came out great. And, we got along great with Neil. And those were kind of the baby steps to get to start working with him on his own projects. And then, we became very good friends. As time went on, he kind of took us more and more into his inner circle, which was a very small circle of people that he was comfortable with. And, we would, at that point, then we were emailing, and, there was, communications changed. We were, it was such a long period of time that we knew Neil and were first after him. And then second, when we started working together, we would email. I mean, I have like I saved a lot of them. I should probably get some old computer drives, and I saved troves of these emails from him, because every one of them was beautifully written. He was a fantastic writer. So yeah, that's how it happened.
So just recently, you guys posted a story. I posted a story about you guys, that you released a number of authentically signed Neil Peart posters and DVDs, right?
Not a lot. We had, we released some when Neil passed. I wanted to do something to honor him, and we started a scholarship through the Percussive Arts Society, the Neil Peart Drum Set Scholarship. And it's kind of low key. We we used the revenue from the sales of some signed posters and books and DVDs to fund it. And I didn't want to make it a big commercial thing. We saw Neil, the price of his signed things are astronomical. So we tried to price it when we would sell something that it was reasonable, that made sense for the buyer. It made sense that we were collecting revenue for the scholarship, and we're starting our third year. In fact, I just was emailing with PAS to make sure that the account is still good. I want to maybe increase the number of scholarships we give out starting next year. And I'm working on a project. I'm hopefully finalizing something with Neil's wife, where we can have something available to sell that'll also bring in more funds for the scholarship, so we can increase the amount of scholarships we give.
Okay, and then one more question with that. I posted the story about 3 weeks ago, I think it is. Do you have any of those signatures still available if people want to buy them?
A couple.
Okay.
There is some. I want to not kind of flood them into the market, because they're special, and sort of once they're gone, they're obviously they're gone. We'll never have them again. But yeah, there's some, and people can reach out to us, and if they're interested.
Okay, fantastic. So, Mr. Cook, didn't mean to ignore you.
Oh, no,
Like I said, I love both of you guys so much. Again, I've never met you.
Rob, I'm yapping away here. I'm just yapping away.
Oh no, I'm loving it. Particularly the early video stuff, and hats off for dealing with that kind of investment, and it paid off, and it was obvious in your work. I have to admit, one of my first projects before I made books, maybe the Frank's Drum Shop book came first, but actually my first project when I was getting into drum history stuff was a video. And I was at the other end of the spectrum, man. And people have to understand that are hearing this. There are probably people hearing this that weren't even born then. But the state of video equipment back then, I decided I wanted to learn about vintage drums, and I thought the best way to do it is seek out the people that knew as much as I figured could be known. And I had this list of targets: Harry Cangany in Indianapolis, and John Aldridge, he was in Boulder at the time, and Bill Ludwig the second in Chicago area, and a couple of others. And I borrowed what for them was a pretty decent camera from Dow Chemical. One of my music store employees had a part-time gig over there and got his foot in the door and borrowed this nice camera. And we drove for on a 72-hour road trip and went to Chicago and Iowa, and I had to fly to Boulder and back taking the camera, but and I knew nothing, so it was just getting these guys in front of a camera and asking them every dumb question I could think of, and then watching all this footage back and trying to organize it in a chronology, and to produce this video, Introduction to Vintage Drums. And all of these guys agreed to do it on a royalty basis only. And it was like $1.60 for every tape I sold, up to 500, which was my break even. And then it would jump up a couple dollars. But the editing for that was done on a U-matic, home studio kind of thing. And then a little later on, I got an early tape editing system. Panasonic had a SVHS system with 2 SVHS decks and a little controller. But again, you're looking for the cut spot and marking it, and going to the end of the cut, marking it, dumping that into your master, and just a lot of thought process, almost like early audio multi-tracking with a TIAC, where you had to line up the record and play heads, and today it just looks so easy by comparison. You just dump it into Final Cut, and you do all the editing with your mouse and everything. But but the end result of that VHS tape, Introduction to Vintage Drums, was pretty darn crude. I couldn't get Modern Drummer to even review it. I thought I'd get some mileage, and they weren't responding. I finally called them, and they pretty much said, you know, if you can't say something nice about something, don't say anything at all. So, and it was crude. But on the other hand, I did sell the 500 and then another 100 after that. And the people that bought it, I didn't get any quality complaints. And it was rough. It was a this old house kind of thing. But the basic content and what these guys knew and were sharing was pretty solid. So I kind of got away with it.
Is that video available still?
No, I think, well, of course, the chief is gone, Bill Ludwig, and I would have to, by rights, go back to everybody and work out a new deal. And so there'd be new contracts and stuff. One guy in particular was pretty fussy about monitoring the royalties and wanting to know updates on the quantity sold and everything. So with the exception of that one guy that I won't even mention the name of, I almost could do it, and I could just put it up on YouTube at this point, but I really can't.
Well, so that's one point, because I do want to get back to you in a second, but as I'm finding out the hard way, our publishing rights to images and having permissions to use and different royalty fees, is that a process you had to go through with these books turning into digital? Did you have to offer or renegotiate licensing fees for images?
Not me. And frankly, I don't think I'm trying to think if I've ever paid for a photo. I mean, I'm basically using old, pretty much public domain stuff, pictures out of catalogs and books that I did with, Hal Blaine and Bill Ludwig and Maury LaShawn and everything. They were giving me access to their, personal photos.
So are like logos considered to be public domain, that kind of stuff too?
I would say yes. I might be technically wrong, but I think where you would run into trouble is selling something at a profit with a logo on it, where you're making money off of the logo.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you're just an educational thing, if I'm writing an article and I'm not afraid to put the logos in there just because people recognize them, and so that's not a legal opinion, but I pretty much can tell right from wrong.
Right. No, exactly. It's just it's amazing. Like, so for instance, a buddy of mine was Frankie Banali, and he played for a band called Quiet Riot, Wasp, and Billy Idol. And I have a series of cards we're going to be putting out for the show that are just pre-promotional cards. They promote a drummer, and they give something for the drummer to sign to give to somebody, that kind of stuff. Kind of a fun thing. So I found an image that I wanted to use for the card as a tribute card to Frankie Banali. And so I contacted the company that represents the photographer. And to start the process was $10,000 for them to talk to each person. Then I'd have to have a separate negotiation with each one of those people. I'm like, I was up to like $30,000-$40,000, and I'm like, these are free handouts. I mean, it's like, wow, So publishing can get really kind of crazy at times, and it's a really interesting thing. It's just not an easy thing that either one of you are doing. In Hudson, I can only imagine a lot of your time and effort is put into, crossing your T's, dotting your I's when it comes to releasing a video.
I wanted to use some audio once after the Introduction to Vintage Drums came out. Then I took a stab at a video drum magazine, and I think I had 4 issues out, and I'd do interviews at PASIC and so on and put those in. And there was a Krupa song that kind of appealed to me that I wanted to use as a lead-in. And I thought, for that, I better ask. You can't just put a Krupa song that's been recorded and published and so on and use it in that kind of context in a for-profit thing. And I looked into who had the rights to it, and that all roads led to Sony. And I approached Sony about using it, and it was going to be $30,000 or something. And I was talking on a budget. I figured I could afford maybe $150 or something.
Exactly.
And I tried to point out the context and how many of these were going to sell and at what price and everything. But I had to kind of fold up and walk home on that one.
Was that Drum View magazine?
No, it was just called Rebeats Video Drum Magazine.
Oh, I missed that one. I never saw that one. Okay. Because I thought
those actually, I got 2 or 3 of them. They're probably pretty horrible quality. They're 720 and everything, even the master. But I could probably convert those now and put them on YouTube, and maybe I should, because there was some kind of interesting stuff. Visited the world's largest bass drums and talked about them, gave the history of them, and showed the drums and stuff, and that kind of thing.
that's really cool. Well, let's just quickly talk about your history. So you kind of alluded to earlier that you went out and interviewed a number of people about the different types of drum companies because you wanted to get into history. What drew you to creating these books? Because these books, for any collector, for anybody who's into the drumming history, these are the Bibles of each one of these companies. There's a lot of work to you put into that. How long did that take you to pull that together? And what was the process?
There was no grand plan, and one thing just kind of led to another. People, oh boy, this is going to get lengthy. Cut me off. This is going too long. But the motivating factor was largely the oil embargo of 1983. I was selling a lot of drums. I was selling a drum set a week, and at that time, which was when the oil embargo hit, gas prices ran up. Gas stations were closing all over. And anything with petroleum in it, records, drum heads, blah, 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 drum coverings, everything was skyrocketing in price. And my drum sales hit the skids. And I had shelves and shelves of old drums that I'd been taking in and trade in my music store for years. And actually, I had a customer in who alerted me to the fact that I had a bunch of valuable stuff back there. And I had no clue, and I wanted to learn about it. And I thought, well, other people are in the same boat and are going to want to learn too. So that's what led to the video, the introduction to vintage drum. And in the course of that and a few other projects, I came across all of George Way's archives in storage in Elkhart, Indiana. And when he passed away, his widow was in poor health and moved back to Canada, and all of his stuff got packed up and put into storage. And some of it got parceled out to Jim Catalano and a couple other people. But basically, I got all of George's correspondence and a lot of personal papers from as far back as his adoption papers and birth certificate and personal letters of correspondence to all these drummers and hundreds of photos from through his whole career, the Leedy and his own drum company and on. And that led me to the first Leedy book. And then that led to the Ludwig book and Slingerland and just being a kind of a detail oriented person and curious about the tracks that a company made as it went and why and who it got sold to and when and why and so on. And with every single one, I felt like it would never really be done. There was always be more to learn and more to find out. But once I covered the basics, the family background, the company, business history, and then a basic dating guide of how to tell the drums apart from year to year, and then just apply that same pattern to a different company and a different set of people and experts and family members out there to chase down, and just kind of following the voices and doing them one at a time.
Well, will there be any other books coming out that you're working on right now that we want to know about?
I'm working on a symbol book. Fred Gretsch used to lean on me to do a book called Symbol Wars because he wanted it to be cleared up about all the litigation between Gretsch and Zildjian through the years. And whenever he'd bring it up, I always thought that's a good way to have everybody in the symbol world hate me. I'm going to have both branches of the Zildjian family upset and blah, blah, blah. But Armand and Bob are both gone, and I think the time has kind of come. And I've got, I go way back in cymbals. I'm not the expert that a lot of people out there are, but I have some specific goals. I want to straighten out some of the Zildjian narrative that's gotten twisted through the years, and not to accommodate Fred, but he's right. There is a lot that's little known, and a lot of confusion about the Gretsch owned trademarks of the past and yada yada. So I want to straighten that out, give an overall history of cymbal making without retracing the steps of Hugo Pinksterboer's book, the Cymbal Book. But then another big part of it is shining a light on the current wave of new cymbal smiths. There are a whole bunch of guys. In fact, the drum show program for this year, I tried to compile a list of cymbal companies and smiths, and there's 100 of them out there.
Wow.
And just in this country, there's a dozen really notable cymbal smiths. They don't all have foundries. They're not doing the casting, but they're buying blanks from wherever, South America, Turkey, China. A few even have gotten Sabian to give them blanks. But these guys are becoming masters at hammering and lathing and so on. And I want to kind of shine a light on those guys, introduce them, explain how they differ from each other and what they're doing. And so that's the big project in the works. Yeah.
Well, can I back you up a little bit to preface a little bit
Guys,
about?
I'm sorry. I've actually got to run off for a meeting.
Okay.
I love the conversation, Rob.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again. Yeah.
Yeah, anytime. It was great to see you, Rob, and Paul. Thanks for the invite.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
I really
It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
our pleasure.
sorry to have to kind of eat and run.
No worries.
No.
We'll do this
Our
again.
pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon and keep
Okay.
going. I
Yeah.
want to watch this and hear what you guys have to say.
Okay, thanks,
Excellent.
Rod.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
So historically, could you please speak to just a quick overview? Because I'm not actually familiar with the Gretsch Zildjian issue.
Okay.
So that'll preface people so when the book comes out, they'll actually have an understanding why it's important.
Yeah. Well, Gretsch imported Zildjian cymbals back in, geez, I don't have it in front of me, 1900, 1890, something like that. And they, in a very unusual move that I don't know if it's been done since. Anyway, that's a moot point. They took out a trademark on the Zildjian logo, and even the name Zildjian, they owned the trademark on for the United States.
Okay.
And this was long before the American Zildjian Company got started. And there was litigation almost immediately in the late 20s. The traditional Zildjian narrative is that Aram Zildjian was in charge of things in Istanbul, and when it was time for him to retire, he wrote to Avidus, who had already immigrated to the US but was a candy maker. And he told Avidus that it was time for him to take over the family business. Avidus writes back and says, well, I'll only do it if you come over here and we do it in the United States. You can come over and teach me how to make cymbals, I'll make them here. So that's the beginning of the Zildjian Company. But it's, and the litigation that Gretsch, as the owners of the Zildjian name in this country and the Zildjian trademark, the outcome of that first litigation was that the American cymbal company had to use a Zildjian or Avidus of Zildjian in their trademark, and then all of their advertising and so on. So that was the first round of litigation, but then it proceeded. There's like 3 more sets, and I kind of go over that in the cymbal section of the Gretsch Drum Book. which I'll probably kind of use as an outline. But at the time I wrote that, I was unaware of some of the later litigation, like in the 50s and 60s and so on. But it involves the use of K Zildjian versus A Zildjian, and A Zildjian all being the proprietary property of the Avedis Zildjian Company in Norwell, and K Zildjian being basically the property of Gretsch in this country. But then there's a lot of history to straighten out as to eventually Zildjian in this country bought out K Zildjian in Istanbul, and brought over the workers, not all of the workers, but a couple of key. I think that's when Gabe came over, Gabe Zildjian, and he settled in Sabia, at Sabia, and so on. But that's a quick overview of what the litigation was about.
I'm actually slightly confused, so that's gonna be exciting to get cleared out on that, so I can understand what's going on with all that. Because it's so amazing to me that another company would actually take out a trademark on another company. It's pretty weird.
Yeah.
But as I've been learning about the drum history, though, it's amazing on how many drum companies back then were not friendly at all. I mean, they were. It was, this is my territory. I'm going to be number one, no matter what it takes.
Yeah. There's a whole section, I think, in the Ludwig book, and they probably in the Slingerland book too, about the litigation between Ludwig and Slingerland over multiple generations. H.H. Slingerland Sr. and William F. Ludwig Sr., and then H.H. Bud Slingerland and Bill II, they're the chief. And at one point in discussing the development of the drumhead, I was looking into the litigation between Slingerland and Ludwig on the plastic drumhead. And I went to Tennessee and chased down a guy named Billy Ray Connor, who was making the plastic heads for Slingerland, which brought the litigation by Ludwig saying, hey, you can't be doing that, and blah, blah, blah. And I found the law firm in Shelbyville, Kentucky or Tennessee, that had represented Slingerland, and they sold me transcripts. That was kind of unusual too. I was kind of holding my breath when I requested it, and they decided, hey, it's been 40 years, nobody's going to care. And they actually sold me at 10 cents a page, hundreds of pages of the transcripts of the trial. And it was amazing. And this man, Mr. Connor, had testified at that trial. And he told me that if only Bud and the chief had come to terms and found a common ground, they could have protected the process, the copyright, or the trademarked and patented process of tucking the plastic heads into the metal hoops, and owned it and made lots more money. But it was much more important to each man to win than to settle. And at one point, they were challenging each other. Bud wanted to go to a gym and put on boxing gloves and fight it out and everything. They were just furious with each other. And, it was kind of too bad, but it was a fascinating story.
That sounds really, really interesting, part of history. But so, where does Remo Belli play a role in this whole plastic head thing then?
Early on, he was approached by Chick Webb, and he almost bought Evans. Chick Webb is kind of credited with the first plastic drum head, but the challenge was in how to fasten the plastic to the hoop or the flesh hoop, and he was using tacks, and he tried to sell Remo on that and selling the whole company. And Remo instead went with the concept of a guy named Sam Muchnick, who developed the epoxy that goes into the metal hoop and kind of glued it in, as opposed to Slingerland and Ludwig, who were crimping it. And actually that crimping process of squeezing the metal counter hoop into or flesh hoop into the plastic to grip it, but without the epoxy that Remo was using, turned out to be considered prior art, because the Pullman company was using that kind of crimping with a steel insert to mount screens on their railroad cars.
Oh, interesting.
So it's the same concept.
Okay.
So they kind of developed in different fields. Evans went on to eventually become kind of a molded flesh hoop. So it was kind of three different technologies used by Remo with the metal flesh hoop with the epoxy in it, and Evans with the completely synthetic or chemical based, I guess you would call it, flesh hoop. And then the Ludwig Slingerland method of simply crimping it in there and squeezing the metal hoop to hold it.
So
There's a lot of interviews out there on the history of that. Bart Vanderzee at the Drum History podcast has done a couple interviews with Remo and Evans guys,
okay.
and usually the narrative is slightly different depending on who's telling the story. So I would encourage people that are really interested to listen to all those interviews and kind of sort it out.
Well, that's fantastic. So I just realized we're coming up in an hour here. I just have a couple more questions, and then I'll ask you about the Chicago Drum Show.
Sure.
So in your opinion, what is the health of the drum market right now? As we're seeing a lot of manufacturers coming together, being bought out or buying each other up. Where do you see this all gonna ending up? And is it healthy at the moment, or is it just corporations, or is there actually a financial issue behind it as well?
That could be discussed at great length and debated at great length, but just as a quick and dirty answer, I think it's real healthy now. Kids have a lot more educational facilities available to them, with all the stuff that Hudson's doing, of course, but also just playing YouTube and all the podcasts that are out there and everything. And they're picking up on it. And electronics haven't killed acoustics by any means. Corporate wise, I don't really know. I have seen a little bit of a pulling back, especially since COVID, in terms of participation in and support for the drum show. Some of the companies like Ludwig and Pearl that exhibited in the past had pulled back, and they're supporting clinicians less and so on. In terms of their overall numbers, I don't really know, but I find I don't know as many people at those companies as I used to. There was, of course, a lot of personnel shifting in 2020 when virtually everybody was working from home, and all of a sudden somebody that I tried to call was no longer there. They changed jobs and working for a different company. So that's kind of a non-answer, but I don't really know on the corporate side of things. But what I do see is a lot of help in the small custom drum companies. And some of them are growing to a point where they're getting to be pretty major companies. I don't think any of them are quite what I would consider corporate yet, but they're doing remarkable things, and they're very healthy. I don't know too much about where C&C is these days, but back they exhibited at the show in the early days as Cardwell and Carrington, and they've kind of gone separate ways now. But Bill Cardwell's, I know, doing some pretty remarkable stuff, and he's one of the bigger ones in terms of a niche or boutique market. But the ones that I see coming to the show are like Joyful Noise, Indie Drum Company, A&F Drums, Virtue Drums from here in Michigan, Jenkins Martin. And then there's a whole another category of guys like Billy Baker, who are kind of customizing from existing top line drums, but customizing for specific artists, doing the Kiss drums and that kind of thing. So that whole market seems to be doing very well. I went down to check out the Nashville Drum Show last year. They're going into their third year now, and they're approaching it very similar to the way I do the Chicago Drum Show in terms of layout and logistics and stuff. And I saw a lot of my exhibitors from the Chicago show were down there, and then a few that were more regional, that were from the South and so on. So I think it's great if we could get about another 3 or 4 shows going nationally. So there's one in the South and one on the West Coast and so on. You'll be seeing even more of these custom guys, because it's kind of an investment to come from LA or somewhere and come to Chicago and get all your equipment there and all that. But overall, I think the drum business and the cymbal business are very healthy, but I think the pie's being cut into smaller slices in both arenas. Yeah. I just realized there's a name that it would be unforgivable to leave out, and that's Trick Drums.
Oh, yeah.
Because actually they're the same age as Rebeats and DW, incidentally. All three of us, Rebeats, Trick, and DW are citing 72 as a startup date. So Trick is 50 years old now, so they're not an upstart, but and they've done a lot of special stuff. Their strainers have ended up on a lot of other people's drums and so on. Mm-hmm. But Mike Dorfman has been coming to the Chicago show for 30 years now and does some remarkable stuff, but it's still kind of considered, I think, a boutique company. Mm-hmm. You still run into people that aren't familiar with them, but they're an important part of the whole food chain out there.
Definitely. Yeah, it's just kind of an exciting time because so 2 standout companies to me that I see press say within the last 2 to 3 years to me is the British Drum Company and then A&F Drums. Mm-hmm. And I've been blown away by both companies approaching drum craftsmanship from two totally different areas. You know, like in A&F, the first time I tried A&F, it kind of went against everything I thought a drum had to be. They're soft. They can squish them, you know.
Yeah.
And the thought is, well, it's not going to hold up. It's not going to sound good. But man, those drums are amazing how they sound.
Have you seen the Big Bertha 2 news?
No? Yeah, well, I posted the news on my website about that.
Okay.
So
yeah. Yeah, Rami's going to be giving a presentation at the Chicago Drum Show this next year in 2023 on how he made that drum, which is going to be really interesting. We've had the Purdue drum at the drum show twice, and and I have also met Bertha, who was from Chicago but ended up at the University of Texas, and both schools were for generations claiming to have the world's largest bass drum, and neither school was really interested in a face-off. But the University of Chicago, at their centennial year, borrowed Bertha back from Texas to have on campus, and they put a paper head on with the University of Chicago logo and so on. And my son was about 10 then, and we made a road trip to go down and meet Bertha and to drive to Purdue and visit the Purdue drum again. So I imagine all of them will continue to say we have the world's largest bass drum, because nobody wants to be mean-spirited enough to litigate and say you can't say that anymore, because they're all big drums. Right. But now I guess the record kind of goes to the drum that A&F is making or has made, a Big Bertha 2. The University of Texas is retiring Bertha and going to put her on display somewhere. And they have this fantastic new drum that Rami has made. So I'm looking forward to seeing his presentation and see how that drum came together.
Well, the technology that went into Big Bertha 2 also is the same technology they're using for their Feather Light series of drums they just came out with. So, and those, they sound amazing too. They're aluminum, and they still have that nice A&F sound to them. So it's really neat. And what I like about British Drum Company is that they're taking hand craftsmanship to a production level, but at least still to this point, they're able to maintain output and not increase production where they start losing the quality of their manufacturing. So it'll be interesting to see if they can continue that process. I kind of think they will, because that's kind of where their focus is. But it's just, when I look at some of these other boutique companies, talk to more of these people, it's amazing the craftsmanship that are going into drums. Like you said, it's a really exciting time. So
Yeah.
Well, Rob, thank you so much. It's been amazing to get to talk to you again. I've been a fan of your work for years, and you're just such a powerhouse in the drumming community, especially with the Chicago Drum Show and everything else. So thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate
my
it.
pleasure. My pleasure.
This has been a production of the Drumming News Network. All rights reserved. All media is owned by the respective parties. This episode cannot be distributed or copied in any form. Please visit DrummingNewsNetwork.com daily to keep up on all the latest drumming news. Copyright 2023.